Hey guys, welcome back to GX Stories Sleeping. Tonight we're slipping into the damp, cobbled streets of the medieval world, where the air smells faintly of wood smoke, livestock, and just a hint of something suspiciously herbal. The moon is high, and the thatched rooftops cast long shadows, but if you listen closely, you might hear murmurs beneath the surface, quiet voices offering blessings, charms, and whispered spells to anyone willing to believe. And honestly, in this world, most people do believe. You probably think of medieval magic as a fringe activity, something hidden away in musty towers or the whispered domain of cloaked figures in forests. But no, you're already knee-deep in it just by stepping into town. Here, magic isn't mysterious. It's as ordinary as bread and fleas. Whether it's a charm against bad harvest or a spell to keep away nosy neighbors, everyone's dabbling just a little. You'll see a merchant trace a protective sign over his coin pouch before counting it. A mother braids protective knots into her daughter's hair. A smith nails a horseshoe upside down over his forge, not for luck, but to trap the evil spirits. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere interesting, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking through a village that looks like a stock photo for the word medieval. There's a church steeple, a well, some pigs wandering a bit too freely. You stop at a house and notice herbs tied with red thread hanging from the doorframe. Not for flavor. Those are apotropaic bundles, meant to keep away sickness and ill will. Inside, you spot a string of dried bones above the hearth and an oddly shaped lump of wax nestled behind a cracked statue of the Virgin Mary. 1 part devotion, 2 parts magical insurance. You ask someone what it's for, and they shrug. Keeps the fae out, they say matter-of-factly, as if you should already know. It's not that people here are superstitious in the caricatured sense. It's just that magic is woven into the logic of daily life. Crops failed? Someone probably cast an ill-wishing spell. Baby won't stop crying? Better tie a charm around its wrist. Toothache? Let a frog lick it and bury the frog under a full moon. Mainstream historical records show that over 90% of known medieval charms weren't part of some dark cabal. They were just normal, passed down from grandma, repeated with conviction, and reinforced by outcomes. Sometimes they even worked, or at least seemed to. The placebo effect, after all, is as old as humanity. And while the church might have had official views, spoiler, they were not pro-witch, you'd be surprised how often the line between religion and magic blurred. A prayer whispered while circling a tree 3 times? Technically spiritual, but also deeply magical. And very much in fashion. One quirky tidbit. People used to place a knife under a baby's cradle. Not to use, but to ward off changelings. Fairy imposters believed to replace human children. It was a widely shared fear. You'd think that would lead to safer practices, but no. It was mainly sharp objects and hope. Modern scholars still debate how much of this was conscious belief versus inherited behavior. Did medieval folks truly think magic worked? Or was it more like wearing a lucky shirt? Irrational, but comforting. There's no clear consensus. The academic term for this is cultural ritual inertia. A very fancy way of saying, because that's what grandma did. As you keep walking, you notice just how saturated life is with these little magical moments. That guy muttering into his cup, probably a drinking charm. That woman tossing a pinch of salt over her left shoulder, definitely not seasoning the dirt. Magic isn't hidden here. It's everywhere. It's part of weddings and funerals, laundry and livestock. You're not just surviving in a magical world, you're living in one. And whether you believe in it or not, you'll probably end up whispering a little spell or two before long. You meet her by the river, kneeling in the mud with her apron hitched up, and her hands deep in some pungent poultice she's pressing onto a fisherman's swollen ankle. She looks up just briefly, stern face, wiry hair, a glance that silently says, "Don't waste my time unless you're bleeding or cursed." She's not a doctor, she's not a nun, but she's absolutely who you call when something hurts, breaks, or won't stop bleeding, and that makes her dangerous. She's a wise woman, or a midwife, or a healer, or depending on who you ask and whether the crops have failed this season, a witch. In the medieval world, these roles blend together with little fanfare. Most villages had someone like her, a woman, occasionally a man, who knew the right herbs to use, the right prayers to mutter, and the right day to perform a ritual for maximum effect. She didn't advertise herself as a sorceress, but people lined up at her door anyway, because she got results. It's awkwardly hilarious how many of these magical practitioners were trusted community members one day and accused witches the next. You might go to her for help inducing labor or curing a fever, and later be called to testify that she once whispered at the moon, and therefore definitely danced with the devil. A lot of it depended on whether your neighbor liked you. Mainstream records, especially trial documents, reveal how often witch was shorthand for woman with knowledge, healing with plants, witch, telling fortunes with eggs, witch, owning a cat that stares at people for too long, very suspicious. And yet, in a world where actual medical knowledge was equal parts bleeding and guessing, her cures often worked better than the barber surgeon's saw and leeches. You watch her grind something in a mortar, rosemary, willow bark, and a pinch of something unidentifiable. She mutters a Latin phrase as she works, not because she speaks Latin, but because certain syllables have power. It's muscle memory now. She learned it from someone who learned it from someone else, all the way back to when Romans still ruled parts of this land. That's how deep the roots of folk magic go. One fringe tidbit: some midwives carried amulets made from animal teeth or dried umbilical cords, not for looks. These were believed to protect mother and child from spirits who allegedly hovered nearby during childbirth, because of course medieval spirits had a terrible sense of timing. Scholars still puzzle over how medieval people justified using magical healing practices while also claiming to be good Christians. The answer? They didn't see the contradiction. If a prayer worked, it was divine. If a charm worked, it was natural. If a curse worked, well, maybe don't talk about that. The boundaries were murky, and the church only got truly fussy when people got too confident. You walk with her a bit. She's carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside are things you'd expect: bandages, herbs, a little wine, and things you wouldn't. A small carved figure, a dead beetle, a coin with a hole drilled through it. She doesn't explain any of it. She doesn't need to. These are tools, and in the medieval mind, healing and harming often came from the same kit. The kicker? You've probably just paid her in eggs, or ale, or a few coins, and you feel better already. And now that you think about it, didn't she hum something under her breath while touching your arm? Was that a song? Or a spell? In this world, you don't get to choose. Magic isn't hidden behind locked doors or tucked into secret grimoires. It's baked into the bread, whispered through the fields, and kneeling by the river, pressing crushed roots into aching limbs. You thank her, feeling a little better, or maybe just more hopeful. That's the thing about magic here. It doesn't need to sparkle or flash. It just needs to feel like something more than what you can explain. And in a world where death is always close and doctors rarely helpful, that might be the most powerful magic of all. You're hungry? Not in a polite, I could go for a snack way, but in the grim medieval way, where bread is coarse, meat is rare, and stew is just whatever didn't rot. So, when your neighbor offers you a warm bowl of something bubbling over her hearth, you gratefully accept, but then you catch a whiff, and you pause. Is that sage? Definitely. Maybe garlic. And crushed bones? Possibly lizard? Why does it sparkle slightly? Welcome to the medieval kitchen, where food, medicine, and magical potions are often stirred with the same spoon. What you're eating may be a healing broth, or a love charm, or a mild curse. You'll find out in a few hours. The medieval pantry is a witch's toolkit with better storage. You spot bundles of dried herbs hanging from every rafter, rosemary for memory, thyme for courage, mugwort for visions. Yes, actual visions. One popular charm involved putting mugwort under your pillow to encourage prophetic dreams. You might have just wanted a nap, but surprise, you're astral projecting. You peek into her spice cupboard. Among the cinnamon and mustard seeds are stranger things: powdered horn, snakeskin, and something labeled only moon ash. Is that just soot from a full moon night? Who knows? It feels magical, and sometimes that's all it takes. The line between potion and soup blurs easily. Boil some onions in ale. Great for a cold. Add a pinch of poppy and whisper a blessing over it. Suddenly it's a sleep charm. Add a crow's feather. Now it's a dream prophecy. Add more poppy and, well, now it's just dangerous. Historically, kitchens were the domain of women, and that meant women were the gatekeepers of most household magic. They knew which herbs to burn when someone was sick, what teas to give for fertility, and how to draw protective symbols in flour on a threshold. Recipes were passed down not just for taste, but for survival. That rosemary-studded bread wards off plague. That weird jelly made from boiled hooves keeps spirits away. Apparently, one fringe favorite. To make a man fall in love with you, place a pinch of your hair in his drink. Hair. In the drink. Today, that's a lawsuit. Back then, romance. Unless you think this was all harmless herb play, some of these concoctions packed real chemical effects. Mandrake root, belladonna, and henbane were used in potions, often in just the right amount to numb pain, induce hallucinations, or temporarily knock someone out. Miscalculate and, well, you won't be needing more ingredients. Ever. Scholars still argue how much these recipes were genuinely believed to be magical versus just being the only healthcare available. Was the intention to cast spells or just survive long enough to see spring? The records are foggy, but the results were often the same. If the potion worked, people kept using it. You watch her stir the pot, muttering a line under her breath. She tosses in a sprig of something that smells like licorice, then taps the edge of the cauldron 3 times with the ladle. Is it seasoning? Or your spellcraft? There's a quiet ritual in this rhythm, a kind of kitchen liturgy. Stir clockwise to bring health. Stir counterclockwise to dispel illness. Don't let anyone else touch the spoon mid-brew. It'll ruin the charm. And always, always taste it before serving. Not just to check the flavor, but to ensure the magic took hold. You sip the broth. It's surprisingly good. Heartwarming. Calming. You don't know if it's the herbs or the ritual, or just the comfort of a hot meal on a cold day. But something in you settles. That's the point. Because in the medieval world, the kitchen isn't just for cooking. It's a lab, a chapel, a place where hands stir more than food. They stir hope, healing, and just a pinch of the unexplainable. You're at the market now. Muddy boots squelching in straw, pigs squealing under tables, someone loudly trying to sell you an onion that looks like it's already lived through a plague or two. You're here for something simple, like eggs or a bit of cheese. But as you reach for a wedge of hard, waxy cheddar, the vendor hesitates. That one's been looked at funny, she says, squinting at the cheese like it personally insulted her. Welcome to the medieval market, where the vegetables might be cursed, the shoes may have hidden spells stitched into the soles, and every exchange is loaded with invisible strings of suspicion and folk magic. You set the cheese down, slowly. Commerce isn't just coin and goods here. It's a high-stakes magical battleground. Bad luck in business could be a hex from your competitor. A spoiled crop sold to you by the miller's wife. Maybe it rotted, or maybe she muttered something while handing it over. People notice these things. In fact, charms for market protection were common. Traders might carry a bag of protective herbs in their belt pouch, things like fennel, vervain, or St. John's wort, to ward off the evil eye. Others whispered invocations before setting up their stalls, asking for divine favor and magical immunity from rival sellers. Yes, magical capitalism was very much alive. You watch a man quietly draw a symbol into the dirt behind his cart, 2 intersecting circles, a line, and what looks like a little crescent moon. You ask him what it is. Keeps thieves away, he mutters without looking up, and keeps their mothers up at night. It's hard to overstate just how suspicious medieval folks were when it came to personal belongings. If you found a dropped coin, you didn't just pocket it. You worried it might be a cursed object. That's not just superstition either. There were actual charm recipes that involved cursing items, then leaving them behind to cause harm to whoever touched them. Imagine medieval booby traps, but passive-aggressive. One particularly odd fringe tidbit: people sometimes tied small written curses to objects like shoes or pieces of fabric and left them in public places, especially near rivals' homes or shops. These were called defictiones, and they were basically angry post-it notes for spirits to act upon. May this man's ox go lame, and may his bread always be stale, is a typical vibe. The debate among scholars is whether these rituals were performed out of true belief, or if they were more performative, meant to intimidate, signal intent, or just provide a weird psychological edge. After all, if your enemy thinks they're cursed, they might just act cursed. Medieval placebo effect, but make it ominous. Even the way you hand over money matters. Some believed that placing coins down on the stall rather than directly into someone's hand protected you from transference magic. Little hexes slipped in through contact. You're basically doing financial hygiene at this point. No Venmo, no magic handshake. You buy a turnip, carefully. Then, as you pass the cloth vendor, you notice her holding something behind her back. A rag doll. Simple, twig arms, knotted fabric body. It's not for sale. It's part of a protective charm she keeps in the folds of her apron. She sees you looking and gives a small shrug. For warding, she says. That's all the explanation you get. That's all you need. Even the children selling apples by the well know the drill. One of them wears a necklace of knotted twine, likely a charm to bring luck or keep ghosts from whispering in their ear at night. You try to tell yourself it's just string, but you're already thinking about getting one, because in the marketplace of the medieval world, it's not just your money at stake, it's your luck, your health, your livestock's ability to walk in a straight line. A simple transaction carries an invisible ledger of charms, protections, and hexes. And if you forget that, you may go home with a very cursed cabbage. You tip your head back, squinting at the sky. It's a clear night, stars scattered like spilled salt, and you suddenly remember that, in this world, those tiny lights aren't just decoration. They're instructions, warnings, cosmic paperwork, filed in constellations, and everyone, from the peasant with his sheep to the king with his crown, believes the stars are talking to them. Astrology isn't a fringe belief. It is science, as far as anyone's concerned. In fact, it's one of the most trusted tools for making decisions. You want to plant crops? Check the stars. Planning a wedding? Better ask an astrologer. Going to war? Consult the heavens, obviously. Nothing important happens without consulting the cosmic calendar. You meet a man in a long, slightly tattered robe who insists he's a mathematicus. That's a medieval astrologer, not just a stargazer, but someone who blends math, philosophy, and planetary guesswork into an authoritative-sounding forecast. He's got charts, he's got ink-stained fingers. He's got no idea that Pluto won't even be discovered for centuries. But he's very confident in Mars' bad mood this month. Mainstream historical accounts show that royal courts often employed astrologers officially. These weren't fringe weirdos. They were scholars, treated on par with doctors. In fact, some were doctors, because knowing a bit about humors and horoscopes made you doubly employable. And this wasn't just symbolic. King Henry II of England once postponed a military campaign because the stars advised against it. That's like canceling a war because your horoscope said, avoid confrontation. Entire kingdoms have waited for Mercury to leave retrograde. You glance at the astrologer's tools, an astrolabe, a complicated set of rings and pointers that make your head hurt just looking at it. He aligns it with the North Star, scribbles something, and then looks at you solemnly. You should avoid dairy today, he says. Venus is unfavorably placed. You nod, as if that explains the suspicious goat cheese from earlier. One fringe tidbit. Medieval people believed that your birthday determined not just your personality, but your internal bodily humors. A baby born under a hot sign like Aries might have an excess of yellow bile, cheerful, quick-tempered, and prone to spontaneous poetry or nosebleeds. It's weirdly specific. This blurring of astronomy and medicine leads to all kinds of interesting overlaps. Certain herbs are picked only when the moon is in the correct phase. Bleeding someone with leeches? Better check the position of Mars. It governs blood, after all. There's even a helpful chart shaped like a man showing which body part is ruled by which sign. If you're a Taurus, maybe don't schedule throat surgery. If you're a Pisces, your feet are doomed, basically. Scholars still debate just how much people truly believed in astrological determinism versus using it as a kind of cosmic scapegoat. It's not my fault I stole your ox, someone might argue. Mars was in Scorpio. Technically true, but also a pretty convenient excuse. You watch the stars shift overhead. No telescopes, no modern astronomy. Just eyes, parchment, and a system built on centuries of guesswork and deeply poetic logic. And yet, there's something comforting in the idea that the universe has a plan, even if that plan is don't eat pears on Tuesdays. As the astrologer packs up his tools, you find yourself wondering what the stars say about you. You're just a traveler, probably cursed by cheese, vaguely protected by soup, and now haunted by the idea that Mercury controls your spleen. But still, you feel oddly seen. In this world, magic doesn't just live in shadows and whispers. It stretches across the sky, shining down on everything from fields to castles. It tells people when to love, when to fight, when to bury the dead, and when to take a nap. And in a place where fate is so easily misread, maybe it helps to think the stars are trying to help, even if they're just blinking quietly above your head. You've ducked into the nearest church, mostly because your feet hurt and you're hoping for a bench that isn't covered in goats. You shuffle in quietly, half expecting austere silence and candle smoke. And yes, the incense is strong, but what surprises you most isn't the solemnity. It's the magic. Because despite what Sunday sermons may say about demons, sorcery, and sin, the medieval church isn't just tolerating magic, it's marinating in it. The priest walks by holding a relic, a bone, supposedly from a saint, sealed in an ornate case. People bow as it passes. One woman weeps openly. A man touches it to his forehead, hoping it'll cure his persistent cough. The priest offers a quiet blessing, and you realize this is a holy object, yes, but it's also a magical one. This isn't just faith. It's ritual, relic, and result. It feels like a spell. And in this world, that's what matters. Mainstream history reveals that the church had an extensive collection of relics. Bones, teeth, cloths, even vials of blood, all believed to carry healing or protective powers. Some churches competed for the most impressive collection, and some relics were so famous they had travel schedules like rock stars. Pilgrims would journey across countries just to touch one. And let's not forget holy water. It's not just for baptism. It's an all-purpose spiritual disinfectant. You've got a haunted house, sprinkle some. Bad dreams, sprinkle more. Want your cow to give milk again? There's probably a priest who'll bless your bucket. But here's the twist. While the church publicly condemned magic, it often made quiet exceptions, especially if the magic had a good branding team. A miracle performed by a saint, divine. The exact same event performed by a farmer's wife after muttering over a spoon, heresy. It all depended on who was doing it and whether they had the paperwork. You sit near the altar and watch a few women light candles. Each one places their candle with precise intention, for a child's health, for a successful harvest, for protection against storms. No one says the word magic, but that's what this is. Focused intention, symbolic action, ritualized hope, a fringe historical detail. There were actually church-approved magical texts. One popular manual, the Picatrix, combined astrology, natural philosophy, and talismanic magic. It was read in Latin, of course, so only the elite could use it, and they preferred to call it scientia rather than sorcery. Branding matters. And yes, monks copied these texts, quietly, carefully. Illuminated manuscripts full of celestial diagrams, herbal recipes, and planetary invocations, all while sipping ale and pretending not to notice how magical it all was. Modern scholars argue over the church's motivations. Was this hypocrisy? Or was it an attempt to control magical practice by absorbing the bits they liked? There's no consensus. What's clear is that the average peasant saw no conflict between attending mass and stuffing rowan branches under their mattress. You glance up at a stained glass window. It glows in the late afternoon light. Rich blues, warm reds, gold halos, and you notice that even the saints are depicted holding strange tools. Keys, scrolls, lanterns. One even has what looks suspiciously like a wand. You tell yourself it's probably a staff, but then again, maybe not. The priest begins to speak, and his words echo through the stone vaults. He invokes protection, calls on divine power, and gestures in the air. His Latin is practiced, melodic, almost hypnotic. You feel it more than you understand it. This is where religion and magic blur like ink on damp parchment. The church can condemn magic from the pulpit and still burn incense, ring bells, and venerate relics that supposedly heal wounds or stop storms. It can forbid witches while blessing saints who levitate, glow in the dark, or resurrect animals. And you? You're caught in the middle, feet sore, eyes wide, and a little less sure of what separates the sacred from the supernatural. The chapel is quiet now, but your mind's buzzing. You step back outside, half blinded by sunlight, and walk toward a crowd forming near a little stone shrine just off the road. People are murmuring, kneeling, clutching little objects close to their chests. Ribbons, coins, bundles of herbs. You hear snippets. Someone's cousin recovered from plague after visiting this site. Another swears they saw a candle relight itself. One man claims his toothache vanished the moment he touched the stone. They're here for a saint, or more accurately, the saint's elbow. Yes, this tiny structure, held together by damp moss and centuries of reverence, houses part of a saint's arm, a real, physical relic, and people treat it with the kind of awe you'd expect from a magic show finale. Except no one here thinks it's magic. It's holiness. But, come on. You watch someone press a rag to the shrine, then carefully fold it and tuck it into their tunic. That's called a contact relic. Basically, the medieval version of charging your crystals. The belief is that objects which touch a relic absorb its miraculous properties. It's common practice. Normal even. And that's the weird part. Saints in the medieval world are often indistinguishable from sorcerers. They predict the future, walk through fire, levitate, heal the sick, tame wild animals, and occasionally show up in two places at once. That's not a resume, that's a Dungeons & Dragons character sheet. Historical records describe saints performing wild feats that would make even seasoned witches raise an eyebrow. Take Saint Cuthbert, for example. His body reportedly didn't decay after death. His tomb emitted sweet smells, and he once tamed sea otters who dried his feet after prayer. Sweet, slightly soggy miracle. Or Saint Bridget of Kildare, who supposedly turned water into beer way before it was trendy, and multiplied bacon like it was no big deal. That's not just divine, that's festive. And yet, no one batted an eye, because these miracles were sanctioned. The church validated them, chronicled them, even promoted them. Pilgrimages to miracle sites were spiritual quests and magical road trips. Faith with a dash of spectacle. One fringe detail: some shrines had miracle books, where pilgrims would record what had been healed or changed after their visit. These included everything from vision restoration to spontaneous wart disappearance. Today, that'd be a Yelp review. Back then, proof of the sacred. Scholars continued to debate whether these miracles were exaggerated, symbolic, or genuinely believed in with literal conviction. There's evidence for all three. What's clear is that the line between saint and sorcerer was blurry. Very blurry. If a layperson healed someone with herbs, that could be witchcraft. But if a saint waved a hand and the lame walked, divine favor, even if the gesture was identical. You wander toward a little spring said to have been blessed by Saint Margaret. The water's cold, clear, and tastes slightly metallic. Someone offers you a sip in a wooden cup, murmuring something about fertility, vision, and protection from night visitations. You're not sure what that means. You drink it anyway. It's funny, some people came here to find peace, others for healing, some just to feel part of something bigger. But beneath it all, there's this quiet understanding. These holy places do something, whether it's real, placebo, or the sheer power of collective belief. It moves people, changes them, and if that's not magic, what is? So you walk on, slightly damp, spiritually unsettled, and quietly wondering if your sore knee is just sore, or if the saint's elbow might have helped a little. You'd laugh at yourself, but this is the medieval world. You don't need to call it magic. You just need to believe it works. You're trudging through the edge of a village now, past crooked fences and smoky chimneys, when a gust of wind rattles something overhead. You look up. A line of small knotted bundles sways from the roof beams. Inside them, bits of salt, crushed garlic, fragments of iron, a little pouch of something you really hope isn't hair. They're not decorations, they're warnings, or more accurately, wardings. This is the medieval home security system, and it doesn't just keep out thieves. It's designed for the unseen, the creeping things, the cursed thoughts, the neighbor who glared at your cow a little too hard last week. In this world, danger isn't always visible. And protection has to work both above and below the surface. You step inside a cottage and instantly feel it. The air is dense with intention. Iron nails are hammered into the threshold, not for stability, but for spiritual defense. There's a tiny horseshoe wedged behind the chimney stone, upside down to trap evil, of course. A broom leans bristles up against the door, not because it's tidy, but because witches supposedly can't pass a broom without counting every straw. You're beginning to sense that everything here has a double meaning. Mainstream historical sources tell us apotropaic magic, protective magic, was everywhere. It was layered into architecture, sewn into clothing, and even baked into bread. Yes, some loaves had protective symbols carved into the crust. You thought it was just a fancy flourish, but no. Those patterns were meant to stop demons from entering through your stomach. In this home, you notice a bowl of salt left deliberately in the corner. That's not seasoning. It's absorbing malevolent energy. The fire burns with a sprig of rue thrown in, not for aroma, but to purify the space. A dried chicken foot dangles near the window. You want to ask, but honestly, you're not sure you want the answer. A particularly quirky tidbit? Some families would bury a dead animal, often a cat, beneath the hearthstones as a form of protection. It was supposed to guard the home spiritually. Archaeologists still find these odd, flattened feline guardians under medieval floorboards. Nothing says welcome home like a ghost cat on patrol. Scholars continue to debate whether people genuinely believed these objects warded off evil, or if they were just engaging in culturally inherited rituals. Either way, no one wanted to take the risk. In a world where illness, misfortune, and death could strike suddenly, it made perfect sense to hang a few garlic cloves and hope for the best. You sit near the hearth and watch the fire flicker. A woman mutters softly as she spins thread, her fingers moving almost automatically. You realize she's reciting something under her breath. It's not a prayer, it's not even Latin, just a string of old words, barely decipherable, like they've been handed down for centuries in a whisper. This is how most protective magic works here. Not loud, not flashy, just subtle habits wrapped in belief. A pinch of ash across the doorway, a piece of rowan wood on the mantel, never speaking your baby's name aloud for the first few weeks, just in case. You're handed a small object wrapped in cloth. It's warm from being in someone's pocket. Inside, a coin with a hole, a shred of blue fabric, and a sliver of bone. For safety, the woman says. She doesn't elaborate. You nod and tuck it into your coat, unsure whether to laugh or bow, because here, protection isn't about logic. It's about layers. Layers of meaning. Layers of habit. Layers of deeply felt, oddly shaped hope. You might scoff at first, but when the wind howls and the shadows move strangely across the walls, you'll find yourself holding that little charm just a bit tighter, and you'll think, maybe it's working. The countryside opens before you. Rolling hills, mossy stones, scattered farms with crooked fences and roofs, patched with straw and prayer. It's quieter here than in town, but the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels watched, not in a creepy way. Well, maybe just a little, but in that old, ancient way that suggests you've stepped into a place where the rules don't quite match what you're used to. And then you hear it, a low chant drifting across the fields, rhythmic and steady, like a lullaby sung by the wind itself. You follow the sound and find a group of villagers in a ring, holding hands, eyes closed, swaying gently. At their center sits a bowl filled with herbs, bones, and something red. Oh good, chicken blood. It's always chicken blood. You've stumbled into a folk ritual, and no one's particularly surprised you're there. This is rural magic, not the book-learned kind, but the earthy, stubborn kind. It doesn't wear robes or read Latin. It works with what's at hand. Sticks, stones, herbs, chickens, always chickens. One woman breaks from the group and scatters a circle of ash. Another hums as she threads blue string around a carved wooden token. Every motion has purpose. Every ingredient has a story. This is spellcraft without books, passed from mouth to ear, hand to hand, over generations. Mainstream historians often dismiss these practices as quaint or unimportant, until they realized how deeply embedded they were in daily life. These weren't secret societies. These were Tuesday evenings, rituals for healing, luck, protection, fertility, and especially for keeping the other things away. What other things? Oh, just your standard medieval spectral menagerie. Spirits, elves, fairies, demons, wandering souls, restless ancestors, changelings, shapeshifters, and the occasional devil disguised as a peddler. The kind of creatures that don't knock before entering. That's why the ashes are there. That's why the chant is still going. And here's a fun fringe fact. In some regions, people believe that certain illnesses were caused by being overlooked, a kind of magical stare that drained your energy or luck. The cure? A ritual involving chant, salt, fire, and occasionally spitting. It wasn't pretty, but it was popular. There's an open scholarly debate about how much of this was genuinely believed versus habitually practiced. Were these people invoking ancient forces, or just keeping up traditions because that's what you do? It's hard to say, but the emotional investment is clear. They chant like it matters, because in their world, it does. You sit on a flat stone at the edge of the circle. Someone hands you a bundle, dried rosemary tied with a strip of cloth. Hold it, they say. It listens. You're not sure what is listening, but again, you hold it anyway. There's something calming about the repetition, the rhythm, the soft voices humming the same melody that's probably been hummed in this valley for centuries. The ritual ends without ceremony. People step away, stretch, nod to one another like they've just finished a chore. Someone offers you a cup of something warm and slightly bitter. You sip it. Tastes like sage, maybe nettle. Good for the blood, they tell you. You pretend you believe them. Actually, you kind of do. Before you leave, one of the older women approaches and slips something into your hand. A smooth, egg-shaped stone wrapped in wool. Carry it when the moon is new, she whispers, just in case. Again, no explanation, just quiet certainty. You tuck it into your coat and walk back through the hills, the faint rhythm of that chant still echoing in your bones. You didn't understand the words. You didn't need to. You felt it, the way the world leans just slightly toward the strange when you're out here, where time folds a little, and the old ways never really died. They just went quiet. The path takes you deeper into the woods now, where the trees grow thicker, their trunks twisted like they've heard too many secrets. The air changes, it's cooler here and damp, like the forest is breathing. You hear birds overhead, but they're distant, and the usual hum of insects seems oddly muted. That's when it hits you. This isn't just a forest. This is one of those forests. The kind that gets marked on old maps, not with names, but warnings. Here be spirits. Here be witches. Here be something. And no one comes in here without a reason, or without protection. You glance down and realize you've already stepped over a line of stones, deliberately placed, almost ceremonial. You'd cross yourself if you were religious. Instead, you check your coat pocket. Good. Still got that egg-shaped stone the old woman gave you. Just in case. Deep woods in the medieval world weren't just forests. They were thresholds, places where the veil between the natural and supernatural thinned. Stories passed in whispers tell of travelers who met strange lights, heard voices that weren't there, or vanished entirely. The trees had moods, the streams had memories, and sometimes the land itself answered back. Mainstream accounts show that people living near these woods treated them with deep respect. Farmers left offerings, milk, bread, coins, at certain trees or springs. Not for God, for whatever else might be watching. Better to keep things friendly. You pass a tree with ribbons tied around the trunk, bits of cloth, little charms pinned to the bark. It's a wishing tree, also called a clootie tree in some places. Each ribbon is a hope, a prayer, a desperate request wrapped around bark and time. And maybe a bribe too. Further in, you find a clearing. At the center stands a stone, worn smooth, with carvings so old they've turned into mossy impressions. Someone, or something, comes here often. There's a bowl set in a hollow, half filled with rainwater and what looks like flower petals, and ash. Ritual site, still active. A fringe detail, some medieval people believe that deep in the woods lived not witches, but wild people, half spirit, half human, feral practitioners of ancient magic. Sometimes they were feared, sometimes revered, and sometimes, in particularly desperate seasons, people sought them out for cures, for answers, for curses. You pause when you hear footsteps that aren't yours, soft, deliberate. You glance around, heart picking up speed, but there's no one there. Not exactly. Just the rustle of branches and the heavy silence of trees that know you're here and aren't sure they like it. Scholars still debate whether the tales of haunted woods were based on real incidents, natural gas flares, strange animal behavior, or simple human imagination in an unfamiliar place. But there's also this theory. These stories weren't warnings. They were instructions. They told you how to behave in liminal spaces, how to survive the places where the world grew thin. You sit on a fallen log, feeling the dense hush of the forest settle around you. The air smells of earth, moss, old roots. You think about how people would walk miles to these hidden groves to bury charms, say whispered words, ask questions no priest would answer, and sometimes, just sometimes, they got an answer. You won't find written spellbooks here. The magic in these woods is older than parchment. It lives in gesture and instinct, in leaving things behind and never looking back, in knocking once on a certain tree and walking away before the third echo. You rise slowly, careful not to disturb anything. You nod once without knowing exactly why and head back the way you came. The eggstone is warm in your pocket. Not every forest needs a witch to feel magical. Some just need you to respect the silence. You've left the forest behind, mostly, and you're walking past a long, low hill crowned with crooked stones. They lean against one another like gossiping old men, laced with moss and time. Locals say the hill is cursed, or sacred, or both, depending on the weather. You're not entirely sure what to believe anymore. This is ancient land, older than the villages, older than the churches, even older than the saints. And under this soil lie the bones of something deep, something half-remembered, because before the medieval world wrapped itself in crosses and relics, there was something else here. The old gods, not Greek or Roman, not the Norse myths you might know from comic books. These were local, weather-beaten deities, spirits of river, tree, and stone, of thunder that meant anger, and wells that meant mercy, not worshipped so much as negotiated with. They didn't demand temples. They demanded respect, and in some corners of the medieval world, they never truly left. Historical records show the church often fought a quiet war against pagan remnants. Priests condemned people for leaving offerings at old trees, for circling sacred stones, for muttering charms in fields. These weren't isolated events. They were everywhere. In France, in Ireland, in rural England. You could find villagers who knew the Lord's Prayer by heart, but still nailed bits of iron into their doorframe because that's what their grandmother's grandmother did when spirits stirred. You stop at a well, half hidden by brambles, yet clearly tended. Coins glitter beneath the surface. Someone's been here recently. Maybe many someones. There's a small wooden figure tied to a branch nearby. It doesn't look like a saint. Here's a fringe detail. Some medieval festivals featured processions to old barrows or standing stones. On the surface, they were Christian celebrations, but underneath, you'd find fertility rites, weather invocations, even sun-chasing dances, all echoes of pre-Christian ritual wrapped in a thin ecclesiastical ribbon. And scholars love to argue about this. Did the church absorb the old gods to destroy them, or to keep the peace? There's no clear answer. But the result was messy and magical. Saints who behaved like fertility spirits, churches built atop stone circles, and holy days scheduled right on top of solstices. Very convenient. You crouch beside the well and dip your fingers in. The water is cold, sharper than it should be somehow. A girl nearby tells you it heals rashes, or grants wishes, or both. She says you have to turn around 3 times after touching it, but not to look back, ever. Again, no explanation. Further along the road, you find an old oak tree with strange markings carved into the bark. Some are runes. Some are symbols you don't recognize. There's an animal skull tucked into a hollow in the trunk. It's not decorative. This is what some medieval folks called the old work. Not sorcery, not heresy, just before. It was rarely talked about openly. It didn't need to be. It lived in the landscape, in the stones too stubborn to fall, in the hills that hummed when no one was listening. You feel it now, a kind of pressure behind the eyes, the hairs on your neck slowly rising. Not fear, not exactly, just a sense that you're not the first person to pass this way with questions, and you probably won't be the last. You move on, watching the hill recede behind you, its crown of stone still leaning in. There's no thunder, no voices, just a quiet reminder. Not all magic was invented in the Middle Ages. Some of it simply survived. And sometimes, when the moon is high and the wind cuts just right across the grass, it still answers back. The sky begins to dim now, brushing everything in that dusky gold that makes shadows longer and thoughts stranger. You're passing through a sleepy hamlet where chickens roost early and smoke curls lazily from every chimney. On the edge of the village, tucked behind a garden wall, sits a cottage that doesn't quite match the rest. Too many herbs hanging in the window. Too many odd bundles tied to the eaves. You found her, the village cunning woman. Not a witch, technically, though depending on who you ask, and whether you owe her money, she might be both. In most medieval communities, this person is a blend of healer, herbalist, midwife, and reluctant exorcist. Someone you go to when the priest shrugs, the doctor bleeds you for no reason. She may not be rich, but she's very busy. Mainstream historical sources show that cunning folk were widespread across medieval Europe. They were often tolerated, even respected, as long as they didn't push their luck. As long as the cow recovered, the baby was born safely, or the hex was lifted. If not, well, that's when respect turned to fear, and fear turned to fire. You knock gently. She answers before your hand reaches the door a second time. She's older than you expected, and younger too, in that ageless way some people have. Her eyes scan you once, up, down, in, and she gestures for you to come in. You obey without hesitation. Inside, the smell hits you first. Rosemary, damp earth, and something bitter that curls in your throat. The room is cluttered but precise. Bundles of herbs hang in organized chaos. Jars filled with powders, seeds, feathers, stones, and liquids line the shelves. You spot a tiny cauldron. Because, of course, she speaks little, and when she does, is with a cadence that feels older than the language itself. You ask what she does, and she simply says, "I help." Then she points to your coat pocket. "Still carrying that stone?" You nod. She smiles like she already knew. You watch her work, grinding something in a mortar, adding it to a pot with a honey and nettle. She stirs clockwise 3 times, then blows gently across the surface. "A charm for sleep," she says. Or maybe for remembering dreams. The difference is slim. A quirky historical tidbit. Some cunning folk use books of magic, like the mysterious Black Book or the Book of Secrets. These weren't scholarly grimoires, but patchwork collections of charms, prayers, and recipes passed from hand to hand. Sometimes they included remedies for cattle illness, right next to instructions for summoning angels. Practical multitasking. She pulls down one such book now. Its leather cover is cracked, its pages bloated from age and spills. You glimpse a charm written in Latin beside one scribbled in Old English. Symbols decorate the margins. She doesn't read from it. She hums. You ask if she's ever feared being accused of sorcery. She shrugs. Depends who's sick, and how soon they get better. That's the tightrope cunning folk walked every day, caught between usefulness and suspicion. Beloved one day, exiled the next. Praise if your charm works, blame if it doesn't. And if someone dies, you'd better pack quickly. Scholars argue whether cunning folk were true magical practitioners or simply community therapists with a flair for ritual. But ask anyone who was cured, comforted, or heard their baby cry for the first time after a night of chanting and herbs, and you'll get a very different answer. She hands you a tiny pouch, cloth, stitched with a symbol you don't recognize. "For travel," she says, "and for things that move in the dark." You nod, again without fully understanding, and slip it into your coat beside the stone. Your pockets are getting crowded. As you leave, the wind picks up. Her door closes without sound. There's no sign above it, no hours of operation, no guarantee of results. But tomorrow, someone else will knock. Because in the medieval world, Real magic isn't found in castles or ancient temples. It lives in a garden cottage, in a hand-stitched pouch, in the quiet certainty of someone who's seen too much to doubt anything. You walk into the heart of the village just as the night settles in properly. Stars pricking the dark sky, torchlight flickering along the worn paths. From a distance, the houses look peaceful, tucked in for the night. But as you get closer, you hear the low murmur of voices, the clinking of wooden cups, and the unmistakable energy of people gathering for a telling. You follow the sound to a large house at the edge of the green. Inside it's warm, smoky, crowded with neighbors, everyone squeezed together on benches, stools, and even the floor. At the center sits the storyteller. Not a bard, not exactly a priest, just the oldest man in the village, and the only one who still knows all the old tales without mixing them up. Tonight's story? Witches. Of course. You settle in among the crowd as he leans forward, his voice scratchy and deliberate. The room hushes. His words are simple, but they ripple through the listeners like a spell of their own. He speaks of the black witch of the marshes, who could steal a man's name with just a glance, of the moonshadow hag who crept into dreams and replaced teeth with pebbles, of the one who turned milk sour and made cows walk backward for a week. Everyone nods along, no one interrupts, because while it's entertainment, it's also a kind of education. You see, in the medieval mind, witches weren't always the broomstick-riding caricatures of later centuries. Sometimes they were real people, outcasts, midwives, healers, accused out of fear, envy, or grief. But other times, they were entirely supernatural. Night spirits, weather witches, shape-shifters, creatures that slipped through cracks in the world. Mainstream historical records show that belief in witches was deeply regional and wildly varied. Some areas were obsessed with witch trials, others barely noticed them, but stories? Everywhere. Passed by word of mouth, embroidered with every retelling, turning real fear into shared mythology. You hear the old man describe how a witch's curse could spoil an entire season's grain, and how the only way to break it was to burn the sheaf under a full moon while chanting backwards. You're not sure what that sounds like, but you notice a few people mouthing along as he speaks, just in case. One fringe tidbit: in some areas, people believed witches had familiars, animals bound to their spirit, but these weren't just cats. Sometimes it was a frog, a hare, or even a bee. There are court records accusing women of keeping bewitched bees, which is arguably adorable and terrifying all at once. The debate among scholars centers around how much of this was literal belief versus metaphor. Did people really think witches could turn into birds? Or were these tales cautionary metaphors for unknown illnesses, sudden storms, or crops that failed without reason? Maybe both. As the story wraps up, the old man draws a symbol in the soot on the hearthstone. You don't recognize it, but half the room nods, as if it's a comforting ritual. The fire pops softly. Someone passes around a mug of something herbal and sharp. You take a sip, and it tastes like bitter root and nettles. Protection. Someone whispers, just a little. No harm in it. The story ends not with a moral, but with a lingering silence. A heavy moment where everyone remembers the real reason they came, not for entertainment, not for warmth, but for reminders. This is how knowledge survives here, tangled in stories, encoded in symbols, whispered between sips of nettle tea. You step out into the night, the echo of curses and charms still fresh in your ears. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls once, twice, and then silence again. You walk a little faster than usual, because tonight, the stories feel a little too close to the bone. The village sleeps now, tucked into its own quiet superstitions. While you wander the empty paths under a sky scattered with stars, you should be turning in, but something pulls you onward. A last thread of curiosity. One final stop. So, you make your way to the edge of the fields, where a small stone building squats just out of sight of the church bell. It's not quite a house, not quite a barn, more like a vault, a place where knowledge lives. You've found the grimoire keeper. Yes, that's right, because not all medieval magic lived in oral tradition or dusty folklore. Some of it was written down, carefully, elaborately, secretly. This was the realm of grimoires, magical textbooks, copied by hand, filled with symbols, recipes, conjurations, and diagrams of things you probably shouldn't say aloud after dark. The keeper opens the door before you knock. A thin man, ink-stained hands, eyes that haven't seen enough sunlight lately. He steps aside and you walk into a room lined with parchment, wax seals, and dust the color of old bones. This is not a casual library. This is forbidden knowledge with good penmanship. Grimoires in the medieval period were often hybrids, part religious text, part herbal manual, part spellbook. The Key of Solomon, the Book of Honorius, and the Munich Manual are real historical examples, and they don't mess around. Inside, instructions for summoning angels, invoking planetary spirits, creating magical weapons, and yes, sometimes binding demons into mirrors. You know, light, bedtime reading. The keeper shows you one, not the rarest, not the most dangerous, but a humble-looking book bound in cracked leather. You open it carefully. The pages are soft with age. You see inked circles, astrological glyphs, words in Latin and Greek. Some of it reads like prayer. Some of it reads like instruction. All of it reads like intent, a quirky detail. Many grimoires began with the strict purification rituals for the reader, bathing in specific waters, avoiding certain foods, and abstaining from, well, let's say distractions. Because obviously you can't summon a spirit of Mercury while you still smell like garlic and regret. You glance through the pages. There's a charm for invisibility. Requires a black cat's eye, not ideal. A recipe for protection ink. Involves crushed ruby dust, expensive, and an incantation to reveal hidden treasures, mostly disappointing. And every spell is layered with ritual, candles lit at specific hours, names of angels written in gold, silence held at just the right breath of night. Scholars still argue whether these books were ever meant to be used, or if they were symbolic, sacred performances written to align the cosmos more than command it. But the people who wrote them weren't playing around. These weren't stage magicians. These were thinkers, scribes, clerics, some of them heretics, some respected doctors of philosophy, who genuinely believed that language could shape reality. The keeper nods as you close the book, almost like he can feel the weight of what you just held. He doesn't ask questions, doesn't offer commentary, just presses a little bundle into your hand before you leave, a piece of wax sealed with a sigil, wrapped in parchment. "For travel," he murmurs. You don't ask what it does. Outside, the stars have shifted. The air is colder. Everything feels sharper somehow, like the world knows you've just touched something old, ancient, preserved through ink and secrecy. The kind of knowledge that doesn't disappear, just waits. And you realize something. In this world, magic isn't just a trick or a whisper. It's written, chanted, mixed, and remembered. It exists in the space between knowledge and belief. In books no one admits to owning. In symbols scratched under candlelight when no one is watching. You don't know if you believe in what that book promised. You're not sure you'd ever dare speak the words inside it. But just knowing it exists, that someone wrote it, someone believed it, it changes how the night feels. A little heavier, a little older, and definitely more magical. You return to the village one last time as the stars begin to melt into a bruised pre-dawn sky. The streets are hushed, not with fear, but with reverence, the kind of stillness that only appears when night is just barely beginning to loosen its grip. You pass shuttered windows and sleeping livestock, and you wonder if anyone else feels it, that tension in the air, like the world is holding its breath. And then, from somewhere nearby, the rooster crows. And just like that, the spell breaks. But before this sleepy village wakes entirely, you find yourself pulled toward one final ritual, not one of fire or incantation, but of naming. You see, in the medieval world, names carried immense power. To name something was to know it, to shape it, to wield it. From saints to spirits, demons to newborns, names were carefully guarded or purposefully changed. This is why some villagers named their children after saints, to ward off illness. Why they whispered over baptismal fonts, afraid that spirits might hear the name before it was sealed. Why they renamed sick animals, hoping to confuse whatever curse had its claws in them. Mainstream medieval doctrine may have frowned on such ideas, but they thrived anyway. Even priests participated, choosing names for the dying, scribbling protective ones in the margins of holy texts. Magic and identity, woven so tightly together, they couldn't be teased apart without unraveling the whole tapestry. You wander into the small graveyard behind the chapel. The stones here are worn smooth, many too old to read, but some still bear sigils carved alongside names. Not crosses, always. Sometimes a star, a spiral, a crescent moon. Quiet echoes of older beliefs slip between the lines of Christian ritual like a forgotten charm in a pocket. There's a new grave near the yew tree. A tiny bundle of herbs lies on the soil. Someone still believes in the old protections. A quirky historical detail? In some regions, when a person was suspected of having been cursed or struck by ill will, cunning folk would write that person's true name on parchment, then burn it with a spoken charm to reset their fate. Almost like rebooting their soul. You leave the churchyard and head back toward the main path. The village is stirring now. Dogs barking, doors creaking open, someone coughing loudly near a pile of firewood. A woman steps outside and tosses salt over her shoulder before hanging laundry. A man mutters a rhyme as he latches the barn door. Small actions, quiet gestures, but each one is a thread in the great quilt of magical thinking this world is stitched from. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether these habits were religious or magical, but to the people who lived them, there wasn't really a difference. Magic wasn't an alternative to faith. It was often the expression of it, a prayer with more steps, a hope with better props. And you're heading off now, satchel a little heavier with tokens and trinkets, pockets full of things no one could explain, a charm for travel, a stone for protection, a wax seal you haven't dared open. You're not a magician, you're not a believer either, but you're walking away with just enough strangeness to make you wonder. You glance back once, toward the hill, the trees, the chimney smoke curling into dawn. The world hasn't changed. Not really, but your eyes have. Now you know how common magic truly was. Not in spellbooks and dragons, but in turnips blessed against rot, in whispered charms for aching joints, in inked names and hidden bundles in the rafters. The magic wasn't rare. The magic was everywhere. You just had to notice it. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts drift like fog through those mossy lanes and smoky hearths, let your breath slow. Let your shoulders drop. Picture those winding medieval paths again. Stone walls crumbling under ivy, distant bells tolling through a sleepy morning mist. Let the images soften. A charm wrapped gently in cloth. A glimmering pool of moonlight caught in a forest spring. The quiet scratch of ink on ancient parchment. You've walked among saints and cunning folk, stepped through shadowed groves, and sat beside fires that still remember names no longer spoken. You're safe now. No spirits knocking at your window. No curses clinging to your footsteps. Just the comforting rhythm of breath, the fading echo of a tale gently told, and the hush of a world settling into silence. The Middle Ages may have been full of fear and wonder, but tonight there's only calm. No need to hold on to spells or relics. Just let yourself drift, slow and steady, into sleep. You're warm. You're still. The night is gentle now, and somewhere in the distance, the magic is resting too.